My wife's parents called me a gold digger at our engagement dinner and demanded a prenup to protect their daughter, so I signed one. Then the numbers came out, and nobody said a word for about 3 minutes straight. Posted to r/true off my chest. I have been sitting on this story for almost a year. Not because I was afraid to tell it, but because for a long time I did not feel like I needed to. The people who needed to know what happened were in that room. They saw the lawyers. They saw the documents. They watched my future father-in-law's face do something I can only describe as a controlled collapse. That felt like enough. But my wife, I will call her Dara, has been gently encouraging me to write this down somewhere, mostly because she thinks it is one of the better stories either of us has to tell, and she is not wrong. She also says that keeping things inside is not healthy and that I should express myself more. She is a therapist, which makes her both the best and most exhausting person to be married to, and I say that with complete and total love. So, here is what happened. Let me start with who I am, or rather, who I appeared to be when I met Dara's family for the first time. I grew up in a small town about 3 hours outside of a city that no one outside the region has heard of. My parents were not poor, but they were not comfortable either. My dad drove a delivery truck for 26 years, and my mom did bookkeeping part-time from home while raising my brother and me. We had enough. We did not have extra. I went to a state school on a combination of scholarships, loans, and summers spent doing work I will not romanticize because it was genuinely exhausting. I graduated in the middle of my class with an engineering degree and no particular plan. What I did have, from a very young age, was an obsessive interest in how things were built, not just physical things, though that too, but systems, processes, the way a sequence of small, well-made decisions compounds into something large over time. I applied that thinking to my career with the same intensity one had applied it to everything else since I was a kid taking apart his mother's appliances to see how they worked. I will not walk you through my entire professional history because it is genuinely not that interesting as a narrative. A lot of long hours, a lot of boring technical work, a couple of things that happened to go right in ways I could not have fully predicted. I started a company with 2 partners when I was 29. We sold it when I was 33. I started another one. I made some investments that turned out well. One of them turned out spectacularly well, in the way that occasionally happens when you understand a technology early and are patient enough to hold. By the time I met Dara, I was 36 and my net worth was something that still occasionally surprises me when I say it out loud. I am not going to say the exact number here, but the 12 million figure in the title of this post is the gap between what I was worth and what Dara's family was worth. Their family was wealthy. Solidly, generationally, comfortably wealthy. Old money, the kind that comes with a hyphenated last name and a house in a neighborhood where the streets are named after the families who built them. I was worth significantly more than that. I just did not look like it. Here is the thing about the kind of money I have. It does not announce itself. I live in a nice apartment, not a mansion. I drive a car that is reliable and clean but not flashy. I have never understood the impulse to signal wealth through a vehicle, which is perhaps the most Midwestern thing about me. I dress simply. I do not wear a watch that costs more than a used car. When I met Dara at a mutual friend's dinner party, I was wearing a flannel shirt and I had driven myself there in the aforementioned non-flashy car, and when she asked me what I did for work I said tech and investing, which is accurate and also deeply boring sounding, which is partly why I say it that way. We talked for 3 hours that night. About everything. She was sharp and funny and interested in ideas in a way that I find genuinely rare. She had a way of listening that made you feel like what you were saying was actually landing, which makes sense given her profession but also predates it, I think, because you cannot learn that kind of attention in a classroom. I asked for her number. She gave it to me. We went on a first date the following weekend that turned into dinner and then a walk and then coffee at midnight in a diner because neither of us wanted to stop talking. I did not tell her how much I was worth for several months. This was not a game. It was not a test. It was just that I have learned, in my adult life, that money changes things in ways that are very hard to undo once the information is out. I wanted her to know me first. And she did know me, and then I told her. And she was quiet for a moment and then said, "Okay, that explains why you never seem to stress about anything." And then we moved on. I loved her for that. We dated for a year and a half. We got engaged on a Sunday morning in my kitchen, which was not planned. I had the ring because I had been carrying it around for 3 weeks waiting for the right moment, And the right moment turned out to be an ordinary Sunday when she was making coffee and said something that made me laugh so hard I nearly knocked over a chair. And I thought, it is this exact thing. This is what I want every day. So I got the ring from the drawer where I had been hiding it and I asked her right there in the kitchen and she said yes while holding a coffee mug and it was perfect. Then I had to meet her parents. I had met them briefly before. A birthday dinner, a holiday gathering, encounters where there was enough ambient noise and social lubrication that nothing too pointed had been said. But this was the engagement dinner, the official occasion, the moment where Gerald and Patricia, I will use their real first names because honestly they earn it, sat down across from me with the specific energy of people who had prepared for this conversation. Gerald is a tall man with the kind of posture that comes from being told, from birth, that the world belongs to him. He has the handshake of someone who learned handshakes the way other people learn sports, as a competitive discipline. Patricia is elegant in a way that is less warmth and more architecture. Everything precisely placed, nothing accidental. They are not bad people. I want to be fair about that. They love Dara. They showed up for her consistently throughout her life and they are proud of her in a way that is real, even if some of their other qualities are less admirable. What they are, specifically, is the particular kind of wealthy that has never had to examine its own assumptions. The kind of wealthy that looks at a man in a flannel shirt who works in tech and investing, and does a quick calculation and arrives at an answer without checking its work. The dinner was at their home. It was a nice dinner, they had put effort in, I will give them that. We were maybe 40 minutes in, talking about the engagement, about timing, about where Dara and I were thinking of living, when Gerald set down his fork and cleared his throat in the way that means something is coming. He said he wanted to talk about practical matters. He said that he and Patricia had discussed it and they felt that, given the family's assets and the wealth that Dara stood to inherit, it would be responsible. And he used that word carefully, responsible, like a man placing a chess piece, to have a prenuptial agreement in place before the wedding. He said he hoped I would understand. He said he was sure I was a wonderful person and that he could see how happy Dara was, but that it was simply prudent to protect what the family had built over generations. He said the word protect, the way people say it when they mean something else. What he meant was, we are not sure about you. Patricia added, with a smile that did not reach her eyes, that they thought of it as protecting both of us. Really. That a prenup was simply a modern and sensible thing that people of means did. She said people of means, in a way that made clear she was not certain I belonged in that category. Dara, beside me, had gone the specific kind of still that I recognized as her being furious and choosing very carefully how to handle it. She started to say something. I put my hand on hers under the table. I told Gerald and Patricia that I thought a prenup was a completely reasonable thing to request, and that I would be happy to have one drawn up. I said it pleasantly, without a trace of defensiveness. Gerald looked slightly wrong-footed by this. I think he had expected either capitulation or argument, and I had given him neither. He said, "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page." And then we finished dinner and moved on. In the car afterward, Dara looked at me and said, "You know what they were implying, right?" I said yes. She said she was sorry. I told her she did not need to apologize for her parents. Then I told her that I had an idea about how to handle the prenup, and that I wanted her to trust me, and that I needed her not to discuss her family's finances with them before we did this. She agreed, mostly because she trusted me and partly, I think, because she had a sense that something satisfying was coming. She is very smart, my wife. Here is the thing about prenuptial agreements that most people do not think about. They go both ways. They require both parties to provide full financial disclosure. Both parties. Not just the one the other party is worried about. Both. Full disclosure. Every asset. Every account. Every investment. Everything. I called my lawyer the morning after the engagement dinner. My lawyer, who has been with me since the company sale and who has seen some things, listened to the situation and then laughed for what I felt was a professionally inappropriate amount of time before composing himself and getting to work. He told me that this was going to be a very interesting disclosure meeting. I told him I was counting on it. We scheduled the meeting for a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the engagement dinner. Gerald had retained a lawyer of his own, a good one actually from a firm I recognized, which told me they were taking this seriously. Dara and I had my lawyer, and I had a second financial advisor present to walk through documents if needed. We met at a conference room at my lawyer's office. Gerald and Patricia came together, which I had not expected. Typically it would be Gerald and his lawyer, but I suppose they wanted a unified front. They were dressed as though this were a business meeting, which in a sense it was. Gerald was cordial in the manner of a man who has already won something and is being gracious about it. He shook my hand. His handshake was slightly more restrained than the first one. Patricia smiled the architectural smile. We sat down. Coffee was brought in. Pleasantries were exchanged. And then the lawyers began. The structure of these meetings is usually that each party presents their financial disclosure documents, both sides review, and then the specific terms of the agreement are negotiated. Gerald's lawyer went first. The family assets were presented. The house, a secondary property, the investments, the trust structures. It was an impressive portfolio. Generational wealth, as advertised, responsibly managed over time, well diversified, the kind of money that knows how to stay money. When the number was fully on the table, Gerald leaned back slightly in his chair. The posture of a man who has laid down a strong hand and is waiting to see what you have. My lawyer opened his folder. I will not drag this out with false suspense because you already know the ending from the title, but I do want to describe the room because the room was everything. My lawyer began walking through my assets in the methodical, unhurried way that he does everything, which I have always appreciated but never more than in that moment. The company I still hold a stake in with its current valuation. The one that was sold and what that sale had generated. The investment portfolio, which is diverse and which includes one position in particular that had performed in a way that sounds made up until you see the documentation. The real estate, not ostentatious but strategic, bought at the right times. The accounts, the structures, all of it laid out the way you lay out a very large, very composed hand of cards. My total net worth at the time of that meeting was just under $19 million. Dara's family's assets, including everything, came to just under $7 million. I was worth $12 million more than the family who had sat across a dinner table from me 3 weeks earlier and implied I was there for what they had built. The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Not the quiet of people searching for something to say. A very specific, very complete quiet in which the shape of something had just fundamentally changed and everyone in the room was adjusting to the new dimensions of it. Gerald's lawyer made a small note on his legal pad. Patricia looked at a fixed point on the table. Gerald himself sat very still in the way of a man whose posture has always communicated confidence and who is now trying to remember how to sit. My lawyer, God bless him, did not hurry it along. He simply waited, with the patience of a man who knew exactly what he was doing, for someone else to speak first. Gerald's lawyer spoke first. He said something procedural about reviewing both disclosures and recommended they take a short break. We took a break. I got more coffee. I was very calm. I am almost always calm, which I think is partly wiring and partly years of learning that the best response to a room full of tension is to simply not add to it. When we reconvened, the terms of the prenup were negotiated in about 40 minutes. They were fair terms, by my lights. Dara and I had discussed what we actually wanted, which was something that protected both of us in the event that things went wrong. Not in the manner of people expecting things to go wrong, but in the manner of adults who understand that life is not guaranteed. The agreement reflected that. It was not punitive. It was not a document designed to humiliate anyone. It was just honest. Gerald shook my hand again at the end. This handshake was different from both previous ones. It was the handshake of a man who is recalibrating, who is trying to decide what he thinks of someone he had already made up his mind about. I held eye contact and smiled and said I hoped we could all have a good dinner again soon. He said yes, certainly, absolutely. In the elevator afterward, Dara laughed for about 30 seconds straight, which she had clearly been holding in since the room went quiet. I handed her a coffee cup to have something to hold so she could breathe. I want to be careful now about how I tell the rest of this, because it would be easy to make it into a pure victory story. The humble man revealed to be rich, the snobbish in-laws humiliated, curtain, applause, and there was satisfaction in it. I will not pretend there was not. I am human. There was a part of me, sitting in that conference room watching the quiet spread across the table, that felt something very primitive and very complete. But that is not actually the part that mattered most to me. And I want to tell you what did. In the weeks and months after the disclosure meeting, Something shifted in my relationship with Gerald and Patricia. Not everything and not immediately. They are complicated people, as most people are, and a single meeting does not overwrite years of assumption and habit. Gerald did not suddenly become warm. Patricia did not suddenly become easy. But the architecture of how they treated me changed. Part of what changed was practical. They could no longer position themselves, even in the privacy of their own assumptions, as the people who were doing Dara protection. Whatever story they had been telling themselves, that their watchfulness was love, that their doubt was wisdom, that their class radar was reliable, that story had been exposed as something they had constructed out of incomplete information and confirmed with nothing but their own certainty. Part of what changed was, I think, simply that they had to start looking at me rather than at what they thought I was. And what they found, now that they were actually looking, was probably not what they expected. I did not lord anything over them. I did not reference the disclosure meeting in conversation. I did not make them feel small the way they had made me feel assessed. I just kept being the person I had been, showing up, being kind to their daughter, fixing the issue with Gerald's office internet when I was at their house one afternoon because I noticed it and knew how, and it seemed like a useful thing to do. Gerald thanked me for the internet thing with a sincerity I was not expecting. It is strange what cracks things open. Dara and I got married 8 months after the engagement dinner, in a ceremony that was nothing like the prenup meeting, warm, easy, full of people who love us, with her father dancing badly at the reception in a way that made me understand him a little better. People are almost always more than the worst version of themselves in any single moment. I try to hold that. It is not always easy, but I try. We are coming up on our first anniversary now. The marriage is good. Genuinely, unglamorously, reliably good, which is my favorite kind of good. We disagree about things. We negotiate. She calls me out when I go quiet and inward instead of saying what I am thinking, which is a habit I am working on. I call her out when she over-therapizes situations that are really just logistical problems. We are learning each other in the way that you actually only get to learn someone when you live alongside them every day. Gerald and I are not close. I do not think we will ever be close. But there is something between us now that was not there before. A mutual recognition, maybe. He asked me last month for my opinion on a tech sector investment he was considering. He did not phrase it as asking for help. He phrased it as two men discussing a sector. But he was asking, and I could tell, and I gave him my honest assessment. He thanked me and said he would think about it. 2 weeks later, he sent a very short email that said only, "You were right. Good call." I framed it. I am kidding. I did not frame it. But I thought about it. The reason I am telling this story now, and this is the part Dara most wanted me to include, is not the prenup. The prenup is the funny part, the satisfying twist, the thing that makes the story work as a story. But it is not actually the point. The point is something I have been thinking about for the whole year since the engagement dinner, something that the experience clarified for me in a way I am still sitting with. I spent most of my adult life building something that is invisible from the outside. Not deliberately invisible, it was not a game, as I said. It was just that I never felt the need to perform it. I am comfortable in myself. I know what I have built and what it cost and what it means. I do not need a watch or a car or a certain kind of address to remind me of it. And because I never performed it, people made assumptions. Some of those assumptions were benign. Gerald and Patricia's were not. What bothers me, and I say this not to be self-righteous because I know my life is comfortable and I have a lot of good fortune to account for, what bothers me is what would have happened if I had been who they thought I was. If I had actually been a man of modest means who had fallen in love with their daughter and wanted to build a life with her, would their concern have been less valid? Would my love for her have been worth less? Would the years of showing up, of being present, of making her laugh and listening to her and choosing her over and over again, would all of that have counted for less because the net worth number on a disclosure sheet was different? I know what their answer would have been if they were honest. I know because I watched their faces in that conference room, and what I saw there was not shame about having doubted me. What I saw was relief that they had been wrong. And those are two very different things. Real reassurance would have come from watching how I treated their daughter, from seeing that I showed up, from the way she talks about our relationship, the ease she carries since we have been together, the fact that she is happy in a way that is not performed for anyone. That is what a parent should be watching for. Instead, they were watching the wrong number. And they only stopped worrying when a bigger number appeared. I feel something about that which I have not entirely resolved. Not bitterness. I have too much to be grateful for to sustain bitterness for long. But something close to sadness. For the version of me that does not exist, the one without the exits and the investments and the stake in the right company at the right time, who fell in love with the same woman and wanted the same life and would have sat at the same dinner table and been measured and found lacking. I feel something for that version. I married Dara because she is the best person I know. Because she is smarter than me in all the ways that matter most. And she lets me be smarter than her in the few ways where that is true without making it a thing. Because when I am with her, I am more myself than I am anywhere else. Because she chose me when she did not know the number, and she would have chosen me if the number had been different, and I know that because of who she is.